Hello ladies, gentlemen, and non-binary compatriots. Do you like funny beeping trash cans and robots with anxiety disorders? Then boy do I have the series for you. In 1977, the world was hit by the pop culture tidal wave that is Star Wars. A movie that everybody and their mom thought would be a complete failure, turned out to be the cash cow of the millennium. Toys, costumes, comic books, novels, Star Wars ruled the world. Those first three movies redefined science fiction as a whole, and the merchandising enterprise created from their popularity was insane. But once the original trilogy ended and the franchise's popularity began to wane, the question was how to keep the brand alive. From 1983 to 1999, Star Wars canon was basically the Wild West. Lucasfilm licensed out the brand to pretty much anything they could get their hands on. In the early years of the franchise's fledgling popularity, George Lucas decided to try his hand at creating an animated spin-off series set in the Star Wars universe. That series would go on to be called Star Wars, Droids, The Adventures of R2-D2 and C-3PO. Now, I'm no proctologist, but that's too many colons. Actually, he commissioned 2 animated spin-offs, but we'll get around to that one another time. Now, George Lucas had his reasons for choosing R2 and 3PO to frontline his franchise's debut animated outing. The first was because seeing as he didn't have anything set in stone for the future of the live-action films, he believed the 2 droids could play a bit more fast and loose with the Star Wars canon, going all over the galaxy without conflicting with the film's main storylines. The other reason, of course, is because
it's a film for 12-year-olds.
Lucas hired animation studio Nelvana to produce the series, having been impressed by their work on the infamous Star Wars Holiday Special. Now, when the only positive thing I've ever heard anyone say about that special is that the animated sequence is decent, well, that's gotta count for something, right? And with Anthony Daniels returning to voice C-3PO, because he'll do anything with the Star Wars name on it, the series was ready for takeoff. And thank Christ they got R2-D2 back for the series. I hear his career really took off after the movies, so it's nice to see the fame didn't go to his head and make him think he was too good for this little kid show. Droids would end up premiering in September of 1985, and did it live up to expectations? Was it the Saturday morning cartoon to end all Saturday morning cartoons? Well, not exactly. What we ended up getting was 13 episodes and a special of a pretty average mid-80s sci-fi cartoon. The first thing you notice when you start the series is the theme song, titled In Trouble Again and performed by Stuart Copeland of The Police. It's a catchy tune for sure. I have a strong love of cheesy 80s theme songs. I think more shows need to have intro songs with hilariously literal lyrics and an overuse of synthesizers. And I won't lie, the longer this show went on, the more often I'd find myself bopping along to the music, to the point where I even found myself singing along by the end of it. But even though the song is an absolute banger in itself, it doesn't quite fit with this particular series. And that issue plagues a lot of the music in this show, actually. When you think of Star Wars music, what do you hear in your mind? The opening theme, perhaps? The Imperial March? The Cantina song? Hell, you might even be in a bit of a Duel of the Fates mood. I see you, you feisty devil, and I like it. Unfortunately, you don't get any of that here. There's no sweeping orchestral pieces for establishing the start of a new adventure, no light-hearted instrumentals to signify hope when our heroes make it out of a sticky situation. It's just a lot of generic techno rock. Music aside, the series itself has a distinct lack of Star Wars-ness for the most part. There aren't any familiar planets or aliens, and there is a distinct lack of war in this Star Wars show. I mean, it's not a good thing when I can count the number of pre-established Star Wars characters who appear on one hand. The disconnect is so strong that when someone like Boba Fett shows up, he feels out of place. Yeah, Boba Fett makes an appearance, and as usual, he does nothing and fails at everything. Like, you'll be watching a story about a prince who's about to be usurped by his vizier, and then fucking Max Rebo shows up, and it's like, oh yeah, I'm watching Star Wars. I mean, even the minor things that only make brief appearances still aren't entirely correct. There's a lightsaber in the pilot episode, but that only begs the question of where this random speeder racer picked up a fucking lightsaber. I mean, he's not a Jedi as far as I can tell. Perhaps he killed a Jedi and took it from him. It's doubtful, but nothing's impossible. Or like when a thermal detonator showed up, and I very loudly exclaimed, that's not what a thermal detonator looks like. But hey, they fixed it later on, so I guess it's fine. And I'm not the only one who didn't gel with these decisions. The production studio asked George Lucas to put in more well-known Star Wars characters, but he refused. I mean, if you change a few things here and there, this show could have easily featured Han, Luke, and Leia in some capacity. Actually, on second thought, judging from the last time this company animated them, maybe it's a good thing they don't show up here. Yeesh. Now, in all fairness, we should consider the time period when this came out. All we had up to this point was the original trilogy, movie, a shitty Ewok movie, and an even shittier holiday special. They were still working things out. I mean, for all we know, if this show was a success, kids today would be clamoring for action figures of Vlix. But, as we know, that's not what happened. And if you really want a Vlix action figure, you'd better be ready to cough up $20,000. Holy shit. The series is split into 3 arcs, which, credit where credit is due, was quite unique at the time, seeing as cartoons typically followed an episodic format so as to not alienate younger viewers. This show works around that issue by constantly recapping the plot of the previous episode to catch viewers up to speed. It's clunky and it can be a bit irritating, but it gets the job done.
Fall, can't 3PO and I come along?
No, Kia. Those gangsters, the Fromms, won't rest until they get the Trigon back.
Well, here we are at the Brad Goodman Lecture.
We know, Dad.
I just thought I'd remind everybody, after all, we did agree to attend his self-help seminar.
What an odd thing to say.
Each arc consists of C-3PO and R2-D2 being taken in by new masters, who each have their own independent storylines going on that the droids just so happen to get swept up in. Masters such as Thal Jobin, Jan Tosh, Mungo Baobab, and Jessica. Good old Jessica. The first arc has the droids join a couple of street racers named Thal and Jor, who along with a freedom fighter named Kia get involved with a local gang's plan to take over the territory. Already you can feel the prequel seeds being sown. A sand planet with a racing circuit and a seedy underbelly of gang violence. Sounds awfully familiar.
It's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
But don't get confused, this planet is not Tatooine, and neither is this one, or this one. Wow, they really like that sand aesthetic, don't they? I suppose a desert is easier to draw than lush foliage and unique locales, but it does get a bit stale after a while. Especially considering that this is an intergalactic adventure, but you could be easily fooled into thinking these are all the same planet. Like I said before, the characters of Thal, Jord, and Kia could have easily been swapped with Luke, Han, and Leia. The rebellious young speeder expert who carries a lightsaber with him, the brash and bold right-hand man who gets himself into more troubles than he's worth, the rebel who's already well acquainted with the galactic conflict and has a parent who is of major importance to the Resistance. The pre-established characterization could have been a major benefit, but instead we're left with shells of characters who get little to no development, arcs, or memorable moments. It's not like there's much time for development anyway, seeing as they're only around for 4 episodes. The most interesting character in this arc is the Weasley son of the crime boss, who's trying to make a name for himself, but no one takes him seriously. I'll admit he can be pretty amusing at times, and bonus points because his dad is basically Mr. Plinkett.
Of all the suns in the galaxy, how did I manage to get you?
Star Wars The Phantom Menace was the most disappointing thing since my son.
The second arc is a very jumbled and very confused mess of plots, just barely connected to one another. Oh gee, I wonder who the new master is gonna be. Probably the one with the most detailed character design and chiseled abs. This is Jan Tosh, and he is the human equivalent of Milk. He doesn't do much, but he's there when you need him, and he's white. It's like he was made to be an action figure and nothing else. He's all muscles and no character. I mean, seriously, I just watched this arc, and I can't remember a single thing about this man. At the end, when they're leaving and C-3PO is like, "Oh, Master Jan, you've always wanted to go to the Academy." I'm like, did he though? The most this character did for me was remind me of Link from the Legend of Zelda cartoon, and I don't think that's a compliment.
Well, excuse me, princess.
The other characters in this arc don't really make an impact either. Characters such as Jolpa, Jin, Jess. This series brought to you by the letter J. They're all one note with barely any relevance to the plot. Jess is particularly egregious because she's made out to be this snappy foil for Jan, who's a lot more cool and confident, but she never does anything, and then at the end she just leaves, and I'm like, well, what was the point?
Well, my work is done here.
What do you mean your work is done? You didn't do anything.
Didn't I?
Speaking of the plot, this one is all over the place. It starts out with Jan, Jess, and the droids helping a prince lay claim to his rightful throne as galactic royalty, only for the final episode to feature the droids babysitting a precocious child and thwarting big game hunters. It's like they couldn't stretch out the original prince idea for 5 episodes, so they just started getting episodic with it halfway through. It's doubly weird because the main bad guy in the first episode does the whole "I'll be back" thing, and we never see him again. I have never seen a show de-escalate the stakes quite like this before. I mean, say what you want about the first arc, but at least it had consistent character motivations. I guess this is where I should bring up the elephant in the room. This arc is the introduction of the infamous Kylo Ren, only made infamous by the fact that his name sounds suspiciously like Kylo Ren.
It's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
That's really where the similarities end, however, because rather than being a whiny, manipulative man-child, he's more akin to a clumsier version of Jabba the Hutt, just a big klutz who revels in his own shittiness. When people say that Lucas started planning for the future movies all the way from the beginning, they typically point to this show as proof. I see it more as someone just got a little lazy in the writing room of those future movies and decided to change one letter of this old forgotten character's name, thinking nobody would notice. And then if they did notice, they would get away with it by claiming it was some sort of Easter egg or whatever. The final arc is a treasure hunt for something called the Rune Stones. And it's just another, wait, what's this? Stormtroopers? Imperial officers? The Emperor is mentioned? Now this is what I'm talking about! This actually feels like Star Wars!
Yeah, baby, yeah!
So what the hell happened? Why did it take 10 episodes for this show to finally hit the mark and achieve what it set out to be? Well, that comes down to the writing team. You see, the first 9 episodes were written by a man named Peter Sauter, who was most well known for his work on children's cartoons such as Care Bears and Strawberry Shortcake, which explains why the earlier arcs feel so kiddie and generic. For this arc, the writing team was taken over by Ben Burtt, who actually has a history with the franchise, providing iconic sound design for the original trilogy, including Darth Vader's breathing, the lightsaber hum, and fittingly enough, R2-D2's beeps and boops. It's evident from his first episode that Burt's familiarity with the IP comes in handy, introducing actual stakes and an interesting plot that, while generic, is molded to fit the theme of Star Wars. That's a valiant effort in itself. I was genuinely excited to see where it would go from here. But unfortunately, Burt's strengths are as a sound designer, not as a writer, leading to this storyline kind of being a jumbled mess as well. It's not nearly as bad as the last one, because there are at least attempts to tie the individual plots together with the overarching story, but God help me if I didn't find myself tuning out halfway through certain episodes because they were just so dull. This plot follows the droid's new master, Mungo Baobab. Man, you can just say syllables in this universe, can't you? He's a space merchant, which I think is just the Star Wars equivalent of a traveling salesman, who looks like he was ripped straight out of one of those animated Bible movies. He's on a quest for the Rune Stone Fortune, which is apparently also being sought after by the Empire as well. Now, I don't fully understand why the Emperor needs this fortune in the first place. I mean, he already controls the entire galaxy. Maybe it's just some compulsive need of his to own everything so nobody else can, I don't know. Either way, this leads to an Imperial emissary teaming up with a bumbling governor as they try to take down Mungo Bungo and his ragtag team of rebels. I feel like a treasure hunt works as an overarching plot because it opens up new opportunities for stories that can safely work within the confines of the hunt. It can be more episodic without feeling out of place, although I feel like they get a little out of their element at times. Like, a chase through the high seas makes sense when they're battling pirates, but when you introduce a government-sanctioned Olympic Games tournament, I think you've gone a bit too far.
I may have gone too far in a few places.
You can tell there's some deep love for the source material here, though. The droids are treated exceptionally well by Bert, with C-3PO being prissy but still likable, and R2-D2 being the mischievous little scamp that he is. And the jokes land far better in this arc than they do in any of the previous ones. There are still a few stinkers here and there, but it's a lot more hit than miss this time around.
Master, help! They're going to reprogram me! You can't do this!
Oh, yes, we can. Any preferences as to a new name? You'll need one to go with your new behavioral circuitry matrix.
Well, I've always been partial to Anthony. Oh dear, what am I saying?
It's also kind of funny to me that they don't show the droids being introduced to Mungo. The first episode just starts with them already being acquainted. Like, sure, it saves time in the long run, but when the last 2 masters got origin stories, and then they just throw this guy at you, it kind of feels like you missed an episode in between. Unfortunately, the arc loses a lot of momentum as it goes on, and it eventually ends with Mungo destroying the treasure, getting the girl, and returning home to his family.
I have to go now. My planet needs me.
And that was the end of Droids. For a few months. You see, the series was cancelled after only 1 season, because it was proving far too expensive to keep producing. 1 episode cost about $500,000, which just wasn't what companies wanted to spend on producing children's cartoons at the time. The series would officially conclude about a half a year later, when they were given the go-ahead to create a feature-length television special. The Great Heep is interesting. Rather than picking up where the series left off, it acts as a prelude to the final arc, with the droids meeting Mungo for the first time. Going into it, I just assumed it took place after the whole rune thing, but then Mungo asks who R2-D2 is, and I was utterly confused. It's highly apparent that the team got a much larger production budget for this special, because at certain points, it just looks far better than the show ever did, and the stakes are much higher. The plot centers around a ruthless droid known as the Great Heep, who takes over a small village, robbing them of water and their valuable resources. He imprisons Mungo, enslaves 3PO, and adds R2 to his, and I shit you not, his R2 unit harem.
R2-D2?
a counterpart of mine said an R2 unit. The Heap has taken him somewhere.
To his harem, no doubt.
Where he sends them to be pampered so that he can eat them later for their energy. This side story also comes complete with R2 getting a sexy droid girlfriend with built-in heels and all.
Hubba hubba. Stop that.
So while the stakes were higher and the production values greater, I still had a hard time sitting through this. It can get extremely tedious at times, with pointless scenes scattered throughout that served no purpose other than to fill time. And the extended runtime doesn't really help either. No joke, it took me 3 days to watch through this thing in its entirety.
3 days!
That's not to say it's all bad, however. The escape sequences are actually quite tense and enjoyable. And there are some really powerful moments, like R2 mourning over the loss of his sexy droid girlfriend. It's played so seriously and in the middle of all this silly cartoon nonsense that it gives off the same vibe as Wicket mourning over his friend in Return of the Jedi. It's kinda surreal. But don't worry, the power of teamwork brings her back to life in the end, only for her to never be seen again. Wow, R2 really said wham bam thank you, droid. Another impactful scene is when R2 seemingly sacrifices himself in order to stop the Heap, and C-3PO is so distraught over it that you can't help but feel for him. When the dam bursts and the water starts pouring out of the sky, there's this great visual of it falling onto 3PO's face, giving the illusion of tears. That is a really nice touch. If there's one thing I have to give this series credit for, it is how well they portray the relationship between R2-D2 and C-3PO. They were in love here. And it's funny that it took me this long to start talking about the droids in the first place, because contrary to being the title characters, they don't really do much in the main series. Most of the time they're just unwilling observers to the events taking place around them. However, I am willing to let this slide because it's basically what they do in the movies too. R2 and 3PO appear in nearly every Star Wars movie, and most of the time they're actually pretty pointless. They're just there to be comic relief. Now, should they have considered that when basing an entire show around them? Maybe, but we're a little past that point. 3PO is certainly at his most obnoxious during most of this show, really turning him into a caricature of himself. As with R2 being so much more goofy than he usually is. He gets jealous, he wears disguises, and he does that funny little scream in almost every episode. But I'm not complaining, I love that funny little scream. Bonus points for when it is used in complete 100% seriousness when he's watching his girlfriend die. I didn't expect that. Aside from the droids, the other characters in the show are pretty bland. Nobody is out there saying their favorite Star Wars character is Jan Tosh. They only get a few episodes each, so it's really hard to connect to them in any meaningful way. We already know the droids, so they don't have this problem. And not to mention, they stick around for the show's entirety. Every few episodes, the droids will say goodbye to their newest master, and you feel nothing. It's the antithesis of taking one last look at my friends. I can't help but feel like maybe it would have been a better idea to pick one master per season and use the time to flesh them out more thoroughly, or even go down the episodic route by having one new master per episode. That way it's not such an awkward transition between main characters. The acting is mediocre at best for the most part, with the only standout being Anthony Daniels, who has completely embodied the character of C-3PO at this point, and will only go on to be better in the role in the future. The rest of the cast either sound uninterested, or as if they were told to do silly cartoon voices with little to no direction or context for their scenes. And the animation is very stiff and janky, a style that seemed to be very popular with cartoons from this era. I found it a very interesting choice to give C-3PO eyelids here when he doesn't have them in the movies. It weirdly works here, but in live action I can tell that would just be horrifying. Also, they chose to give him all gold casing, doing away with his silver leg from the original trilogy. There are a number of scenes that show him being dismantled, so I wouldn't have been opposed to a silver leg origin story, being that this is a prequel and all. But maybe that's just the massive Star Wars nerd in me trying to find lore where there isn't any. And still on the topic of 3PO, there are a shocking amount of moments putting him in, shall we say, suggestive positions.
Next time, R2, you get on top.
Now, I don't know whose idea this was in the animator's room, but I personally could have been spared the knowledge that C-3PO has a dumpy. I mean, what is this, a Kama Sutra of the Wills? All in all, Star Wars Droids The Adventures of R2-D2 and C-3PO too many colons is a generic kiddie cartoon mess that had me dozing off more times than it had me glued to the screen. It didn't need to exist, but hey, you can say that about half the stuff that Star Wars has put out lately, so. It's not all bad, but there's just not enough good here to warrant me recommending you watching it yourself. Unless, like me, you're an insane person who wants to experience everything the galaxy far, far away has to offer. And so it is within my solemn duty that I will have to condemn this series to the Sarlacc pit, where it will find a new definition of pain and suffering as it is digested over the course of 1,000 years. This court is adjourned. Thank you all for watching. Let me know if you guys have seen this show and what you think of it in the comments. Did you watch it when you were younger? Did you even know it existed? I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say. I hope you like this style of video, because this is the kind of content I want to be putting out more on this channel going forward. So feel free to subscribe if that might interest you. Until next time, may the Force be with you.